The Galactic Empire had ruled for centuries, its dominion stretching across the void like an unyielding iron grip. Among the thousands of species it had conquered, humanity was the newest addition, a race that had dared to defy assimilation. When Earth resisted, the Empire responded with fire. Great cities crumbled under orbital bombardments, governments collapsed, and those who refused to kneel were eradicated. The survivors, scattered across occupied worlds, were left to endure the slow suffocation of subjugation. Ilara Voss had been born into that occupation. She never knew an Earth that was free. Her mother had whispered stories of blue skies and boundless oceans, of nations and cultures that thrived without alien masters dictating their every breath. But for Ilara, such a world was nothing more than a myth. The only reality she knew was the one enforced by the Tkar, whip-wielding overseers, cold-blooded governors, and the ever-present shadow of execution platforms. Mars, once a beacon of human ingenuity, had been transformed into a labor world. Massive refineries choked the sky with black smoke, extracting resources for the Empire's war machine. Those who toiled beneath the metal scaffolds were not citizens. They were assets, expendable and replaceable. Humanity had been declared genetically inferior, too unpredictable for full integration, too stubborn for peaceful servitude. The Tkar found amusement in testing their limits, breaking them piece by piece. And when that failed, they made examples of them. Ilara had learned early that resistance meant death, but submission meant something far worse: erasure. The Empire did not just conquer planets. It devoured cultures, languages, identities. Earth's history books had been rewritten in the Tkar script, its heroes rebranded as criminals, its wars of independence reframed as foolish insurrections. The names of fallen cities were forgotten, replaced by sterile designations in the imperial tongue. Even the act of remembering had become an act of defiance. She refused to forget. By the time she was 25, Ilara had become the most wanted rebel in the system. They called her the Ghost of Mars, a specter that struck in the dead of night, vanishing before the Empire could tighten its grip. She led raids on supply convoys, sabotaged refineries, and orchestrated the escape of hundreds from forced labor camps. But every act of defiance carried a cost, and the Tkar made sure to collect it in blood. Her latest mission had gone wrong. An informant had betrayed her team, selling their location to the Imperial enforcers. The ambush had been swift and merciless. Ilara had fought, had watched her comrades die, had felt the searing pain of a stun bolt against her spine. When she awoke, she was bound in cold iron, staring into the violet eyes of High Governor Selvarek, the Tkar commander who had spent years hunting her. "You humans never learn," he mused, inspecting her like one might examine a wounded animal. "You mistake resistance for strength. But strength is knowing when to kneel." Ilara spat blood onto his pristine uniform. "And weakness is thinking that fear lasts forever." Selvarek smiled, a slow, cruel expression. "Then let us see what lasts longer, your defiance or your life." The trial was a spectacle. The Tkar did not simply execute rebels, they displayed them. The gallows stood in the center of Olympus Square, where thousands of human workers were forced to gather under the watchful gaze of imperial sentries. The execution of Ilara Voss was to be a lesson, a final warning that resistance led only to the noose. She did not beg. As the rope was tightened around her neck, she met the crowd's gaze with unshaken defiance. Her people had been beaten, starved, driven into silence, but the fire in their eyes had not yet died. The Tkar had mistaken patience for submission. As she stood on the platform, Selvarek addressed the crowd. His voice, smooth and authoritative, carried across the square. "Let this be the fate of all who challenge the Empire. There is no salvation in rebellion. There is only order, obedience. And those who reject it," he gestured toward the lever at his side, "will find themselves erased." Ilara closed her eyes. Not in surrender but in quiet acceptance. She had known this end was coming the moment she had chosen war. She only regretted not seeing the day humanity rose. The lever fell. For the first time in decades, the Empire had made a fatal mistake. They believed they were executing a rebel leader. They did not realize they were creating a martyr. The footage spread like wildfire. The image of Ilara Voss, hanging lifeless beneath the banners of the Empire, ignited something that centuries of oppression had failed to extinguish. The broadcast was meant to break them. Instead, it became a rallying cry. From the mines of Titan to the slums of Europa, humans who had long accepted their chains clenched their fists. Engineers repurposed stolen imperial technology, forging weapons in secret. Former soldiers, long disarmed, retrieved hidden caches and prepared for war. The rebellion, once scattered and starving, began to move as one. And on the outer rim, beyond the Empire's reach, a fleet began to form. Hidden among the abandoned colonies and drifting wreckage, humanity's vengeance stirred. They had endured the lash, the boot, the noose. Now they would teach the galaxy what it meant to be human. The message spread faster than the Empire could contain it. The execution of Ilara Vos had been intended as a final warning, a reminder of humanity's place beneath the heel of the Tkar. Instead, it became the spark that set the galaxy ablaze. Within days, whispers of rebellion turned into open defiance. Within weeks, entire colonies had risen, striking at their oppressors with newfound fury. The United Human Front was no longer a scattered dream. It was a reality, and its war had begun. On Titan, deep within the frozen tunnels of an abandoned mining station, the last remnants of Earth's military leadership gathered. They had been officers and strategists once, stripped of their ranks when the Empire conquered Sol. Now they were the architects of humanity's revenge. General Elias Mercer stood before them, his voice hardened by years of silent waiting. "The Tkar believe us weak," he said, his eyes moving across the faces of his commanders. "They think we lack the numbers, the firepower, the will to fight. They see our grief as submission. They are wrong." A holomap flickered to life in the center of the chamber, displaying a series of Imperial installations across the system. Labor camps, supply depots, communication hubs. Targets. "The enemy has grown complacent," Mercer continued. "They do not guard us as they would a true threat. That mistake will be their undoing. We do not have their fleet. We do not have their armies. But we do not need them. We will fight as we always have, fast, unseen, relentless. We will take their weapons, their ships, their technology, and we will turn it against them. And when the time comes, we will show the Tkar the price of their arrogance." Across the occupied worlds, the first strikes came like ghosts in the dark. Explosions tore through Imperial supply lines. Industrial centers collapsed under the weight of sabotage. The power grids on Europa flickered and died, plunging entire sectors into darkness. And then, without warning, the Empire's own warships began vanishing. The disappearances were not the work of chance. They were calculated, surgical. On the edges of the system, scavengers and smugglers, once criminals, now soldiers, hijacked Imperial patrol vessels, slipping away before alarms could be raised. The stolen ships were taken to hidden docks in the asteroid belt, where engineers stripped them down, studied their cores, and remade them into weapons of human design. The Empire had always dismissed human ingenuity as undisciplined, inefficient. They had never seen it turned against them. When the first fleet of repurposed warships emerged from the belt, the Tkar barely took notice. A minor insurrection, nothing more. They dispatched a single battle group to eliminate the threat. The admiral in command had expected a slaughter. Instead, his ships burned. The battle over Callisto lasted only an hour. The Tkar, expecting a direct confrontation, had not anticipated the swarming, unpredictable nature of human tactics. Their cruisers were cut apart in coordinated ambushes, hit-and-run strikes that never allowed them to regroup. Entire warships vanished into the blackness, their own hacked navigation systems turning them against each other. By the time the battle ended, not a single Imperial vessel remained. It was the first true victory, and it sent a message the Empire could not ignore. In response, the Tkar deployed reinforcements. They dispatched fleets, tripled security on occupied worlds, tightened their grip. But the more they squeezed, the more humanity slipped through their fingers. For every city they locked down, another erupted in rebellion. For every leader they executed, 10 more rose to take their place. And beneath it all, a single truth became clear. This was no longer an insurrection. It was war. Among those leading the charge was Commander Ria Vesquez, a former pilot turned strategist. She had once flown beneath the Empire's watchful eye, forced into servitude as a conscripted officer. Now she commanded one of the first true human warships, a repurposed destroyer christened the Vengeance. From its bridge, she watched as the fires of revolution spread across the stars. "They still don't take us seriously," she muttered, her fingers tracing the edge of a cracked flight badge, one of the few things she had kept from the old world. "They think we're just another uprising." Mercer's voice came through the comms, steady as ever. "Then we'll show them how wrong they are." The next strike was bolder, more brutal. The human fleet did not simply attack an outpost or sabotage a supply line. They targeted Dominion Prime, the Empire's largest command station in the sector. If Callisto had been an ambush, this was a statement. The assault began with a deception. A distress signal was sent from one of the stolen Imperial ships, its crew feigning a catastrophic failure. When the station's docking bay doors opened to receive them, the true attack began. The Vengeance and its fleet emerged from the void, weapons unleashed in a symphony of destruction. The battle was chaos. Imperial forces, though greater in number, struggled against the relentless unpredictability of human tactics. Entire docking bays were blown apart from the inside, station defenses were turned against their own men, and when the Tkar realized what was happening, it was already too late. The station burned, its wreckage drifting in the cold of space. For the first time, the Empire felt something it had never associated with humanity: fear. But fear alone was not enough to win a war. The Tkar, despite their arrogance, were not fools. They had crushed countless rebellions before. They had ruled for centuries. And though the loss of Dominion Prime sent shockwaves through the Empire, their response was swift. Their fleets doubled. Their punishments worsened. And their wrath knew no limits. On Earth, where humanity's heart still beat beneath occupation, the streets ran red. Executions became daily spectacles. Cities were burned in retaliation. Millions were made to suffer for the sins of the rebellion. But suffering had never broken humanity before. It would not break them now. As Mercer stood aboard the newly claimed Avenger, humanity's first true warship, he watched the flames from orbit and made a silent vow. This war would not end with survival alone. It would end with vengeance. The Empire had underestimated them. Even after the fall of Dominion Prime, the Tkar still saw humanity as nothing more than a nuisance, an irritation to be crushed beneath the weight of their superior fleets. They believed that overwhelming force would end the war before it could truly begin. They were wrong. Humanity had moved beyond desperation. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was vengeance, cold and calculated, sharpened into a weapon designed to cut deep. The retaliation began with blood. Across occupied worlds, human strike teams emerged from the shadows, targeting imperial governors, high-ranking officers, and anyone who had ever raised the lash against their kind. They did not seek to merely disrupt the Empire's rule. They sought to erase it. The Tkar, long accustomed to being the ones delivering fear, now found themselves hunted. The executions were precise, silent. Entire command centers were found abandoned, the bodies of their rulers left hanging from the same platforms where they had once hanged human dissidents. The message was clear: the oppressors would now become the prey. On the outer rim, the human fleet swelled. More Imperial ships were stolen, their systems rewritten, their hulls repainted with the mark of the rebellion. But stolen weapons would not be enough. The scientists of Titan, hidden beneath layers of ice and secrecy, worked tirelessly to craft new horrors. Humanity had always been a race of innovation. They had built cities in the void, bent the laws of nature to their will. Now, that brilliance was turned toward destruction. The first of their new weapons was released above the colony of Velrax, an Imperial stronghold responsible for manufacturing the Tkar's planetary defense grids. The Empire's fleets had been built to withstand direct assaults, to endure sieges that lasted decades. But they had never seen anything like the Plague Engine. It was not a bomb nor a virus. It was something else entirely. A swarm of microscopic machines, undetectable, slipping through air vents and filtration systems, embedding themselves within Tkar biology. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then their bodies began to fail. Muscles turned rigid, nervous systems misfired, skin hardened into brittle stone. They suffocated in their own bodies, their organs petrifying from the inside out. Within hours, the colony was silent. The humans landed without resistance. There were no prisoners. Mercer watched the aftermath from the command deck of the Avenger, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Vasquez stood with arms crossed, the glow of the ruined colony reflecting in her eyes. "This is only the beginning," she murmured. "Their fear is growing," Mercer replied. "Good. Let it consume them." Fear was a weapon now, wielded as mercilessly as any cannon. The Tkaris' once unshakable confidence had fractured. They fortified their cities, pulled back their forces, but in doing so, they only weakened themselves further. The Empire thrived on absolute control. Without it, they crumbled. Their own governors began to question their leadership, their allies hesitated, and the species that had once lived under their rule now watched with newfound hope. The humans had done the impossible. They had wounded a god. But the Empire was not dead yet. Enraged, the Tkar retaliated with a force unseen in generations. They unleashed their most feared weapon, the Devourer fleet, a war armada that had once been used to end entire civilizations. Thousands of ships, each the size of floating cities, moved toward Nova Prime, the largest human colony outside of Sol. There would be no negotiation, no attempt at reoccupation. This would be annihilation. The humans were waiting. For weeks, Mercer had studied the Empire's movements, predicting where they would strike, how they would deploy. He knew they would make an example of Nova Prime, and so he set the stage for their downfall. The human fleet did not meet them in open battle. They did not fight with honor or tradition. They fought with cruelty, with deception, with every ounce of brutality that had been inflicted upon them. The Empire's warships arrived to find a silent world. No resistance. No defenses. They approached cautiously, scanning for traps, but there were none. Convinced that the colony had already fallen, they moved in to claim their prize. That was when the sky ignited. From beneath the surface, hidden launch silos erupted with fire, releasing thousands of projectiles into the fleet above. These were not ordinary missiles. They carried gravitic destabilizers, weapons designed to warp the very fabric of space. The Tkar ships, built for strength, found themselves collapsing inward, crushed beneath the weight of their own gravity wells. The survivors tried to retreat, but their navigation systems had been compromised. The Vengeance and its fleet struck like vultures, cutting through the chaos, disabling engines, boarding the stranded warships. For the first time in their history, the Tkar surrendered. Not out of mercy but out of sheer terror. Vasquez stood among the prisoners in the ruined halls of a captured dreadnought, staring down at a trembling Imperial admiral. He did not beg for his life. He knew it would not be granted. "You have no honor," he spat. "No code. You are nothing but beasts." Vasquez knelt before him, meeting his gaze with an expression as cold as the void. "Honor is a luxury we were never afforded," she said. And then she pulled the trigger. The war had passed the point of return. The Empire, once unchallenged, had been reduced to a wounded animal, lashing out in its final desperation. But humanity did not intend to let it recover. They would take this war to the Tkaris throne world. They would burn their cities, shatter their monuments, erase their legacy from history. They would end the Empire just as the Empire had once tried to end them. The Imperial capital burned. Great towers of silver and obsidian, once symbols of the Tkaris' eternal rule, lay shattered beneath the weight of orbital bombardment. The skies, once filled with the pristine order of their fleets, were now a graveyard of twisted metal. The humans had come as conquerors, not liberators. There would be no treaties, no armistice. The war would end only when the last remnant of the Empire was buried beneath its own ruins. Mercer stood in the remains of the High Palace, the shattered throne of Selvarek before him. The Tkar had made their final stand here, defending the heart of their dominion with the desperation of a species that had never known fear until now. Their bodies littered the marble floors, their ceremonial armor now nothing more than scrap. He had expected them to fight to the last breath. Some had. Others had chosen to end themselves before the humans could take them. Even in death they refused to kneel. Vasquez entered, her boots leaving streaks of blood across the polished floor. "It's done," she said simply. "Their last fleet is dust. Their warlords are either dead or in hiding. We've won." Mercer exhaled slowly. Victory. It should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a vast, empty chasm. "Have we?" he muttered. "Or have we just replaced one empire with another?" Vasquez frowned but did not argue. She understood the weight of what they had done. The humans had not merely defeated their oppressors, they had annihilated them. The Tkar homeworld, once a jewel of the cosmos, would never recover. Its people, what few remained, would never rise again. It had taken centuries for the Empire to build itself into an unshakable force. It had taken humanity less than 5 years to tear it apart. Across the galaxy, the shockwaves of their victory rippled outward. Worlds that had once suffered under the Empire's rule now stood uncertain, watching the humans with the same fear they had once reserved for the Tkar. Some cheered their liberation. Others whispered of a new terror rising to take the old one's place. The humans had won, but in doing so they had become something else, something no longer bound by the chains of the past. In the ruins of the Imperial archives, scientists and historians combed through centuries of data, erasing the Tkaris version of history, restoring what had been lost. Old Earth records, long buried beneath Imperial propaganda, were uncovered and distributed among the reclaimed colonies. The names of fallen cities were spoken aloud once more. The forgotten dead were given back their stories. Yet even as humanity rebuilt its past, its future remained uncertain. The war had forged them into a weapon, but what happened when the weapon was no longer needed? On the bridge of the Avenger, Mercer stared out into the void, where the remnants of the Imperial fleet drifted like ghosts. Vasquez joined him, her expression unreadable. "What now?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. The war had been his purpose for so long that the thought of peace felt almost alien. "We rebuild," he finally said. "But we do not forget." Humanity had proven its strength. It had defied extinction and risen from the ashes of subjugation. But in doing so, it had reshaped the galaxy in its own image. The Tkar had once believed themselves invincible. So too had countless empires before them. And now, as humanity stood upon the precipice of its new era, one question remained. Would they become the next empire to fall?